is a spark, it can ignite, and all you gotta do is bring the light. Cause a new light shine, cause a new light shine. Time to get on up, say tradition.
Shalom, my friends. Welcome to the Light Lab podcast, where we play with prayer and hold the gems of our liturgy to the light. My name is Eliana Light, your podcast host and head philosopher, and I'm so grateful to be back with you today for another beautiful interview, y'all. This was so special. First to say, missed you. Hope you've been able to listen to some old episodes. In the meantime, excited to bring you this interview with the amazing Rabbi Adina Allen of Jewish Studio Project. We are recording very soon an episode with Rabbi Josh Wachowski, who's able to take time out of his bonkers busy schedule to be with us. We're so excited. Back on our sweet and cozy Shabbat Friday night at home journey, we're going to explore hand washing. What is there to say about hand washing? We shall find out very soon. And we're excited to keep learning with you. Today, we bring you an interview with Rabbi Adina Allen, who is a spiritual leader, writer, and educator who grew up in an art studio, which she'll talk about, where she learned firsthand the power of creativity for connecting to self and to the sacred. She is co-founder and creative director of Jewish Studio Project, an organization that is seeding a future in which every person is connected to their creativity as a force for healing, liberation, and social transformation. Doesn't that sound great? I've experienced JSP's process and programs firsthand, and I must say they have been truly transformative in my own life, to my artistic practice, my thinking about myself as a creative person, an arts person. We'll definitely talk about that, and definitely inspired me in the realm of Jewish education and connection and growth. It's truly moving and beautiful. Based on the work of her mother, renowned art therapist Pat B. Allen, Adina developed the Jewish Studio Process, a methodology for unlocking creativity, which she has brought to thousands of activists, educators, artists, and clergy across the country. You can find and experience the process for yourself. Of course, we'll put a link to JSP's website in the show notes. They have public offerings all the time. Definitely would recommend experiencing it firsthand. Adina is coming out with a new book called The Place of All Possibility, which will be released July 16th through Iron Press. We'll, of course, put a link to pre-order. As you will hopefully hear, Rabbi Allen is so well-spoken, so clear-eyed in the vision for the world and her vision for what creativity can do for each of us and our connection to the sacred. Her writing is always such a gift, and I feel like it was such a gift to me and hopefully to you to get to interview her in this time before her book comes out. Definitely pre-order the book, and I hope you enjoy my conversation with Rabbi Adina Allen.
Shine a new light, shine, shine, keep it burning bright, shine, shine, shine.
Rabbi Adina Allen, welcome to the Light Lab.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Oh my gosh, it is such a joy to have you here and to get to talk about creativity and tefillah and spirit and art. And as we like to do on this podcast, we're going to start way back in your childhood. And I would love to hear about what relationship you had with tefillah as a child. And you can take that in whatever direction you would like.
What a great question. I think of a couple things when you ask that question about tefillah as a child. One is thinking about growing up at Jewish summer camp. I grew up for 10 summers going to summer camp, and I remember touring camps with my parents when I was little, like 8 years old, to see kind of what camp would I go to. And I remember I went to Osrui, the sort of flagship reform camp in Wisconsin, and I just fell in love. And I fell in love because there was tefillah twice a day. And tefillah was done in the woods. And I remember my parents being like, "Are you sure you don't want to go to like a sports camp or something with a little more, a little more secular?" And I was like sobbing as we left family camp, being like, "You have to let me come back here."
Oh.
And I think of all the parts of camp for those 10 years that I went, like praying in the woods, reading Torah, singing with people, and engaging in tefillah with a community with whom I had done the whole day. Like not just going to a
Hmm.
separate place to engage in prayer, but we just farmed, we took care of animals, we did learning, we went swimming, and now we're praying. It made it feel like tefillah was like beautifully and easefully woven into the fabric of the day and serve to really connect and uplift and mark these moments as a community throughout the day.
That's beautiful. Did you have a sense at that time of why or how tefillah felt powerful, a sense that you were connecting to something greater? Or was it just, we're singing and this feels really nice, you know?
That's a good question. I think the singing, and they do such a great job, and the
Yeah.
harmonies and just being in prayerful song with people is powerful. But
Hmm.
I think it really went beyond that of like, it's a different way of being together. It's a very, in some ways, when done right, I think a very like heart opening and vulnerable way of being together. And so to be with
Hmm.
people who you have friend stuff with and you've just done this learning with and this work with, but then like now you're like opening your hearts alongside one another and proclaiming together like we believe in something bigger and beyond ourselves that's also deep within ourselves. I think even as like a 9 or 10 year old, like that felt really powerful to get to be in a different mode of interacting alongside my peers.
And was that in contrast to other ways that you had exposure or experience with tefillah in the rest of your non-camp life?
Yes. And it also made me think of, I mean, the other place that I really felt tefillah, which the first thing that came to mind was traditional liturgical prayer, this experience at camp. But the other place that I really felt alive and connected to God was in the art studio in my house growing up.
Hmm.
Um, as some will know, and I write about in the book, I grew up in an art studio. It was the biggest room in our house, and art making was offered to me as a practice for connecting to God from a very early age. And so I had both of these experiences. One was this explicitly Jewish liturgical outdoor communal prayer experience, and the other was this experience with my mom or whoever else was in our house creating art with us in the studio, connecting to self, bringing forth images and writing. And I think both of those contrasted for me with, synagogue prayer, which felt harder, a bit more stifled. And I think so many rabbis I know, struggle with that still now. Like, how do we keep that like alive, engaged? And it's different when you have to drive somewhere and put on a certain outfit and, all of those things that can make it just feel disconnected from the rest of our life.
Yeah. I'm wondering about then the path that kind of led you to the rabbinate and into being a holder of Jewish sacred space in this way. Um, how did prayer, liturgy, your understanding of God kind of change or grow with you as you progressed along that path?
Mm, what a good question. I feel so grateful for my Jewish upbringing, which really gave me the knowledge and the language, some of the language at least, and liturgical language, really. And I guess what comes to mind is when I went away to college, I sort of looked to get involved Jewishly. Nothing really spoke to me. And I had been on this very Jewishly engaged path. And then in college was like, I think there have to be other ways to connect. And so started really connecting through nature and through the environment. And I remember studying abroad. I did a semester on South Caicos Island, which is a very small island in the Turks and Caicos island chain. I was very into environmental studies and I was doing
Mm.
marine biology research, scuba diving every day, researching juvenile coral populations, their health and
Wow.
habitat as a baseline data study for what does the environment look like now before tourism comes. And then sadly, what will we have to say has changed once tourism comes. But I distinctly remember being down, I think probably 80 or 100 feet under the water with this transect on the ground, looking at these tiny coral and taking notes on my underwater slate with a grease pen. And all of a sudden just feeling something, looking up and seeing like 100 dolphin just swim by in the open water. It's totally
Oh
unreal.
my goodness.
And just liturgy just came into, like, I was like, Marabu, the world is so amazing. And I was like, oh my
Yeah.
God, there's this language that's been encoded in me, and how incredible that it can come forth in this authentic way when it's so needed.
Yeah.
And that then sent me on a path of like real longing of like, wow, I don't have this sort of communal prayer that I used to have, and then really longing for that, which is part of what led me on the path to rabbinical school.
That's so beautiful. I think that so perfectly illustrates how the themes that we are invited to explore and to inhabit in the liturgy through tefillah aren't meant to stay there, that they're meant to be brought out of tefillah with us. And like, I think I am more maybe I wouldn't say more skilled, but it is more likely that I will find moments of beauty and awe and wonder in nature because I have the language of liturgy that invites me to look for it and notice it. And then when I'm in a place of maybe more kind of institutional synagogue prayer, I can bring those experiences into the liturgy and it brings it more to life. But I can't maybe imagine a more Marabu moment than coming face to face with 100 dolphins. That is really quite beautiful.
I'm thinking back to my time in rabbinical school, and
Mm,
also my experiences with liturgical prayer, which at times can feel so alive and so beautiful. And whether it's, hundreds of people singing together or like three people, just the harmonies and the way the words transform through communal prayer. And there's other times I think I felt or feel that my time in services, it feels almost like I'm in school. Like I'm
mm.
trying to get those words or get those phrases, because there's so many words, right, in a traditional liturgical service, trying to get them encoded in me so that exactly what you're saying can happen, so that they can emerge and come through when they're most needed authentically in my life. And part of, we'll get to maybe what led me on the path to Jewish Studio Project and the process and art making. But I think part of what we're trying to and inviting people into is how to take these beautiful lines, both from liturgy and also from other Jewish sources, from the canon, and like almost take them and like shine them like a gemstone, so they can like glitter and glisten and be held in our pocket, so that we feel that it's ours and it's refracting some piece of our life through that line.
That's beautiful. That's an image that we like to use a lot here at the Light Lab is holding up the gems of our liturgy to the light, because depending on how you turn it or change it or where the light is coming from, it's going to shine forward differently at any given moment for us. But I also love the idea that a gem is something you can put in your pocket. I mean, right now I have this crystal that I've been fidgeting with all day, and you know, it comes from the earth and it feels connective, and I get to take it with me. So I love that idea. And I'm one of those people, and I'm sure you meet folks who come skeptical into the Jewish Studio Project or process space. I think we met for the first time, or at least I experienced the process for the first time at a Jewish mindfulness retreat for educators out at Brandeis Bardeen, which was really incredible. And of course, my first thought was, ugh, art, but I'm not an artist. I'm sure you encounter that a whole lot. Um, I'm wondering what you think it is about art that can invite all of us in, and then maybe use that as a jumping off point to explore, yeah, how JSP came to be through all of these intersecting threads in your life.
Sure. I want to go back just to that image to answer your
Yeah.
question that you just had of that gemstone. First of all, I love the synergy between I didn't know that was a phrase that you use, but it makes so much
Mm.
sense. Um, but that I just saw you on the video, even while we're talking, holding that gemstone in your hand. And it just made me think of what we need to do is handle this material,
Hmm.
and handle not in bear it, although sometimes it feels like that, but handle as in like turn it around, touch it, work with it, like intermix the cells of who we are with the cells of who it is, so that something new can be born through that alchemical process.
Mm.
And I think that engaging regularly in tefillah is a way of handling that. I think that engaging in art making through this process is another way of like handling it, turning it around, taking it into you, seeing what is the mirror of the self that's reflected through our interaction with that line or that text today. And then having like a repertoire or like an accumulation of those experiences and memories with that line so that it pings on all these different points in our lives and all these different memories. And it just, yeah, becomes so alive through that.
That's beautiful. How did this come to be? There are threads of connecting with the sacred and art and environmentalism, which feels like it comes from a deep care for the world and all of the inhabitants of the world, and a rabbinic thread. How do these all mingle and converge in your life?
Great. And I holding the question that you asked also about if we don't feel like we're an artist, how do we deal with this? I'll try to weave that into it. But
Thank you.
so going back to that early sort of sanctuary in my house, of the sanctuary being the studio, I feel incredibly blessed that I grew up. I didn't even know it was strange or different. I mean, I knew it was different than my friends and what was happening in their houses, but how special it was until I left home, I think, as is often the case for things that we are brought up with. It's just the water we swim in and you can't really appreciate it. But that I grew up around sort of wild, fantastical images. My mother, Pat B. Allen, is a world-renowned leader in the field of art therapy. She's written a number of books, and but really she's a practitioner. And to get to just grow up alongside her, making her images, inviting me to make my own images, and that our house were just filled with these beings, almost it felt like that had come through the creative process.
Mm.
And that art making was offered as a way to touch in on the confusing, complicated, dark, queer, glittery, strange, like all those places in the self that maybe didn't have a place in my, what did Hemingway call the town I grew up in? A town of broad lawns and narrow minds, which I don't think it was that, but
Oh,
the way you
wow.
might categorize any suburban town, right?
Mhm.
The parts that didn't really get to come out and be explored. So I sort of had that in me. And in college during this time after the dolphin sighting and all of that, I was sort of, I think what was emerging was like, we need a way to connect to something bigger and beyond ourselves. And that came through both in my environmentalism, where I was getting to the point of extreme overwhelm and burnout through the
Yeah.
activism that I'm doing, that I'm sure many listeners can relate
Mhm.
to, certainly now in this time of trying to like change something that wasn't ready or wasn't in that moment going to be changed. um, how do we allow ourselves to be held by something? And also in taking in the amount of information in college that I was taking in, I'm thinking specifically of a year-long colloquium class I took on the geopolitics of oil and water, and just the devastating, and this was already however many years ago, the devastation of what was happening. But no one was inviting us to like emotionally process any of that.
Mm.
It
Yeah.
wasn't even acknowledged as a thing that would be happening, that you would have an emotional reaction to rivers in China running with cancer or whatever we were reading, aquifers running dry. And so during that class, rather than going abroad to do research as we were meant to do in the interim time between semesters, I proposed to my professor, could I go intern with my mom in the studio? Might this process that I grew up with be a way of helping um, process the emotional component of intellectual work, and not just intellectual work, but process the emotional component of being alive as a human who feels and um, is in touch with the world? And might that be something that could be useful? So both the spiritual component of Judaism and the liturgy and the texts and what I'd grown up with was starting to reemerge in my life. And then also this art making practice alongside that as a way to potentially help us process the world.
That is amazing kind of emotional clarity that I'm not sure I necessarily had as a college student, to feel a need, and not just to say this is something I need, but this might be something more of us need, that we're taking all of these problems purely on an intellectual level, but because we live them, they are in our bodies and in our hearts. And so, what do our bodies and hearts need? Um, and looking back on your Jewish and art upbringing and saying, oh, I've been kind of bequeathed these tools that we have. How could these tools be used towards this purpose? And great that your professor, I'm assuming the answer was yes, that they they allowed you, or maybe it was no and you figured it out on your own time. But what a beautiful Genesis story.
Thank you for reflecting that back. And I want to say just a couple things that might be helpful for listeners also in thinking about is, first of all, everything is beautiful as a story in retrospect where it all makes sense when we read it
Yes.
together. So it certainly felt like a struggle at the time. And I felt like,
Hmm.
oh, all my
Yeah.
classmates are going to Egypt to research solar panels and are going to, you know, Dubai, or like all these like exciting places to do this like, real research. And I was
Yeah.
going to my mom to a studio in a garage. And so I think just allowing ourselves to feel the pull of what feels real and needed for us, and
Yes.
trusting that if we follow what's needed for us, that actually will be what's needed for others too and will benefit others. And it really can't go the other way around. So I was in desperate need of it, and I like really couldn't have gotten through those 6 weeks between semesters any other way. I did what I needed, and thank God I'm grateful that that was able to serve is able to serve other people now. And yes, I will say my professor, I don't think he fully, understood it, but he said yes to it. And I just got to reconnect with him this many years later in Boston just
Oh,
last week.
nice.
He was at a celebration at Hebrew College, the rabbinical school that I attended, that I am so honored to have been honored at, and he came to that. And so it was
Hmm.
a very full circle. So it was beautiful.
That is so beautiful. Was working with your mom as more of an adult, were you able to look back on things you had learned, or values that had been instilled in you as a child kind of differently, or see them with a renewed intentionality or sacredness?
Oh, absolutely. And it's incredible. It's ongoing, right? My mom is a senior advisor and faculty member at Jewish Studio Project. So to get to continually understand her depth of wisdom and to continually be both creating alongside her and learning from her, um, I've certainly gained so much more like clarity and language for things that were just sort of felt experiences as a kid, that now I'm like, oh, that's what this pedagogy, if you want to call it, is,
Mm.
or that's what this epistemology, methodology, framework, all those things that were just like, this is just what we're doing in my house. So certainly, yeah, I've gained language for it, but also it's an ongoing collaborative process, which I know is rare for people and their parents, and certainly for daughters with mothers. So I feel incredibly, incredibly grateful for that.
It's really beautiful that a truly intergenerational project that you've been able to bring and spring forth, building on her incredible work and now yours. Where did you start seeing the intersections between um, Jewish life, Jewish ritual, and what you were learning with your mom in the studio?
Yeah, that's great. So I want to go back to my time in rabbinical school. I sort of gave some of the
Yeah.
origin story of Jewish Studio Project, but the other part really happened in rabbinical school. Um, a couple things. First, I felt like we had tefillah that we did communally, and we had Beit Midrash. So we had prayer, and we had the house of inquiry where text study was happening, which is a core component of Hebrew College's curriculum, which is part of why I went there, that it's built into every single day. You're learning in the Beit Midrash with a chavrita, with a learning partner. Um, and that there were beautiful things about tefillah that were like heart opening and connective, and there were beautiful things about Beit Midrash, but it almost felt like there needed something connecting the two,
Hmm.
a way for Beit Midrash to really drop down and these texts to really like touch our lives and not just inspire interesting and novel ideas of interpretation, but interesting and novel ideas that actually really spoke to something that we deeply needed, going back to what we were talking about before, and that felt like they were connecting us to God, to our deeper selves, and to something bigger than ourselves.
Hmm.
And so I started bringing this, what my mom developed, the process I grew up with I just knew as what we did in my house, is called the open studio process. Um, my mom wrote about it in her books. It's a process that's used globally all over the world. She advises people in Taiwan and in Mexico and all over India who are using this process. It's a very simple process of intention setting, art making, and witness writing. And so I started experimenting with what might it be like after studying a text with a chavruta, um, to then do this process. So how might art making and writing be a way of elongating our relationship with the text, of helping us to move from the excitement and dynamism of the intellectual mode of engaging something into a different mode with that same material? And how might that transform us? So yeah, I found that all kinds of new interpretations that weren't arising through the Chavruta, certain things were arising through Chavruta, which were exciting, and then totally other interpretations were arising once engaging in the creative process. And I think foundational to that, going back to that question you asked a while back, is the belief, I think, that I was bequeathed, that was really ingrained in me from my mom, that every single one of us is creative, that art making is all of our birthright, and that we live in a culture that has really said art is just for the artists, either self-proclaimed or defined by a very narrow definition, and 100% to lift up artists and people who do this as their livelihood and who are skilled artisans. And working with materials is something all and any of us can do, right? We don't have to be world-class hikers to go out in the woods and be transformed by being in nature. And so what might it be like if more people were using their hands and were handling the material in this way? What might come forth, not just for me, but for more people?
That's maybe not exactly word for word, but very close to the invitation that I give folks before singing with them, because it's very similar. People say, well, you don't want to hear me sing. I'm not a singer. Singing is our birthright. Singing has been part of what it means to be a human since there were human beings. Singing has been over professionalized to the point where we tell ourselves that we're not supposed to be doing it anymore. And even with all of that, my first experience with you, I was still like, well, I'm not an artist. There was still that wall there. And I remember an invitation to letting the process be what is the focus, and looking at it as a meditative tool or a mindfulness tool, and not thinking about the product. And I remember how freeing that was. At the end, it looked like it was just a black square or a gray square, but it took a lot to get to that black gray square, and I felt more connected to that piece. It felt so vibrant to me because of the invitation that I had been given at the beginning. I'm wondering, how have you found, or what are the ways that you invite people into that creativity, and why do you think it's so important for people to reclaim the birthright that is art making and creativity?
Oh, thanks for sharing that about your process, and thanks for the question. And I'd love to hear your answer to this also, because a lot of wisdom to offer. And I think that we are all missing out on so much when we're cut off from, I think creativity is a code word. I think of it's a code word for God. It's a code word for our deepest selves. It's a code word for that like stream of energy and connectivity and aliveness that is all of our birthright, as you said. And not only am I missing out if I'm disconnected from that in myself, but like the world is missing out on that, whatever is able to come through that through me. So, and I think about that specifically in Judaism, right? The world is missing out on, like, if you aren't having an opportunity to connect to your creativity and connect that into Judaism, I don't get to learn and benefit from that beautiful face of God that would come through your process. And I think especially in a time, right, when we look at the world around us and say, like, in many ways, this is not how we hope or imagine it to be. We want it to be different. We need to be connected to our creativity in order to bring forth something new and something different. And I think in many art spaces, and certainly each one is dictated by what the goal is there, but if we're only in art spaces where we're learning to reproduce something that has already been made, right, that is one skill and it's an important skill. But how are we learning to trust and get in touch with our own intuition, sense of inner wisdom and knowing, and to trust that that's there inside all of us? And I ask at the start of our workshops, right, how many people in this room felt, we're told by a third grade art teacher that they're not creative? Everybody raises their hand. And if they don't raise their hand, they're just shy. And it's true for them also, right? And they'll admit it later. It's like almost like I picture a flowing river that's gotten blocked by stones. And we need to remove those stones because there's so much energy and possibility there that we're not being able to tap into. So I want that for myself, and I want that for everyone.
It's something about third grade, because in my intro, I say, like, Did your third grade choir teach you to mouth along to the words because she didn't want to hear you sing? It's right. It's something about that age of kid. And, if a third grader is struggling with math, we say, that's all right. Everyone has the potential for numbers learning. We're going to find a way to do it that works for you. And if a kid is like, well, I'm not artistic, they're like, okay, I can't sing. Okay, end of conversation. It's wild.
That's such a great, so interesting that you point that out. Exactly. It gets put totally off limits. And I just want to name in what you shared, and I think probably what all of us have experienced, like just to give some like care to that part of ourselves. Like,
Yes.
there's so much like vulnerability. There's so much shame tied up in it, right? And so just to name that, and to see adults, I think of our work at Jewish Studio Project, and I imagine you think about this too with your work, is there's like a pastoral element of like
Yeah.
helping people reclaim access to that thing that has been so harmed, and so much shame built up around, and that we're taught like you can live without that, you don't need that, and stick to the things that you're
Right.
good at, stick to the things that you're a high performer at. But I think there's so many, being able to reproduce something or make it look a certain way is only one type of success in art. And I think using art, using song, visual art, movement to get in touch with a deep and powerful place in ourselves that can move something in us and can move others is another.
Yeah. Picking up on something you said is potentially one of the things that is important about connecting to creativity and imagination and play is it is how we are able to dream about potentiality of what could be. And I think something that I hold a lot is that I think our Jewish tradition invites us both to be grateful and in awe of what is here now, the world that is around me now, and always hold that the world is not as just as it could be or should be, and that the only way to get there is through play. And maybe what scares people or kind of is scary about it is when we tap into that place of creativity and imagination, we don't know what's going to come out the other side. And so, for a culture that's very much about, how might I say this, peace over justice and like the veneer of conformity, the idea that we might tap into something where we don't know what's going to happen next can be very scary. So, I'm wondering, yeah, how you see that creative process as an important player, or how it can help us relate to that which is scary or chaotic or distressing in our world.
100%. I love everything you just said. I think that's part of why, either consciously or unconsciously, those around us, our society shuts down that, encourages us to shut down that part of ourselves,
Yeah.
because it is terrifying and it does go against conformity. And oh my God, what if every person was in touch with like the deepest part of themselves that was trying to call forth something new? Like, what would happen in the world? We don't know. And to say, like, yeah, those things that we don't know, that is really scary. It's scary for all of us, no matter how much we want the world to change and we want to see things different. Like, change is hard, change is scary. And so that's part of what we're trying to help encode in ourselves and in those who do the Jewish studio process, is practicing art making in another way, is practicing in a low stakes way. What is it like to have something new emerge that you didn't know would be there when you started?
Hmm.
And a low stakes way, I say like a piece of paper and some paints. Okay. It's not maybe going to change the world, but maybe it is. Maybe through that, we are developing our capacity to let something new come through, to let ourselves be surprised, to work through a stuck place and let that be destroyed, and then something new come on top of that. All of those things that we actually need to navigate the world and our families and our communities and our greater communal life, I think we can practice on the page. And the other thing I'll say is that this process came out of, my mom's work in the field of art therapy. We say the page can hold it all. And the page is just standing in for any form of art that you're engaging in this process, right? The song can hold it all. The melody can hold it
Yes,
all.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
I think we need to have a place to put our heart emotions. So kind of going back to what I was talking about in college and, with all the intense information we were learning, if we don't have a place for that, it gets right where we're pressing it, and it's
Hmm.
actually controlling what we do anyway, but in an unconscious, subconscious way. And so can we have a place that isn't just behind the closed door with a therapist, and therapy is wonderful, but that isn't just about us and our individual, issues and psychoses, but is about like us getting to do that alongside one another. And I think to me, in the deepest sense, that's what tefillah, liturgical tefillah, can feel like. I'm
Mhm.
working through emotions and strugglings and joys, but alongside other people. And we're
Yes.
letting one common thing, this liturgy, hold us all, but we're each having our own experience and we're doing it alongside one another. And that's exactly what I think of when you do the Jewish studio process in community, is like the ritual of the process is holding it all. You don't need to know exactly what's going on with me and my gray square and my writing and my piece. But neither do I have to feel totally alone, that it's just me and my struggles. I get to do that alongside you. And so I think parallel process is something so deeply needed right now, and something that we know and recognize is so important for children. And then we kind of stop having ways to do that as adults. And so I think anyway, whether it's liturgical prayer, art making, that we can be in parallel process is really needed.
I love the language of parallel process. I think that is very true. And in general, so many things that we say, it's important for kids. Play is important for kids. Or when I started in like tefillah education work, like tefillah for kids needs to be interactive and engaging and dynamic. And I'm like, well, what about the adults though? Doesn't it need to be that for them too? Why do we stop? We say, for kids, it should be spiritually nourishing, but why stop there?
Oh, breaks my heart. And
I know, but you're bringing out this great work. I remember it was a long time ago, but it stands out very clearly. This first Jewish studio process experience. I think you said something about being able to hold two truths at once, or being able to hold discomfort, and being able to sit with discomfort. And you kind of traced a lot of the ills of our world to people who are acting out in violence and in rage against others because they don't know how to sit with discomfort. And I'm wondering if you could go on that thread, because that's really sat with me even all these years later.
thanks for reflecting that back. Yeah, wow, there couldn't be a more timely topic, I think,
Yeah.
in so many aspects of our world. I think when we can't hold emotions, dissonance, things that feel hard, right, we outsource that by thrusting that onto someone else and trying to get them to hold that for us, or creating more dynamics because we're not able to resolve it in ourselves. And so we just keep creating more situations to try to feel that and experience that. And then, so yeah, I think one thing I've been thinking about a lot is how we hold political change as the only mode of change. It seems like it's sort of held up as like, that's how change happens. It happens through politics. And I think, yes, that's true. And it's not the only way that change happens. I think an entire society, community mindset can shift on a spiritual plane. And I think that that's real work. And I think that's actually the work that underlies anything being able to change or shift politically. And so, yeah, those were two things that came up for me as you were talking. How do we take our activation and work with it? Investigate it, befriend it, get to know what's there underneath it. Certainly very live for me. I think we are living in a time in which we are all, if we're awake to the world, constantly activated, and then activating each other because of our activation, right? And there's no mechanism that is like bringing our system back to stasis and back to rest so that we can be more like supple and receptive and less violent to each other in all kinds of ways. And so that is probably one of the most important ways I think the process can be of service. I think tefillah, liturgical prayer, can also be a mode for doing that. So both bringing us back to stasis from a place of activation, and also to investigate and inquire and get curious about what activates us and what's underneath that for us. Because there's something very powerful and very wise that lies underneath that activation. But if we're only acting from up here, from the place of activation, nothing is ever going to shift and change.
Right. And just like any practice or process, the more often you tap into that, the maybe it never gets easy, but it becomes more familiar and less strange and more nourishing. So how do you see kind of creativity as a spiritual practice and what that might mean, kind of both on a communal level and for your work in JSP, but also for any individual who's interested in that?
Yeah, what a great question. I think doing the Jewish studio process, at least for me and for my work, like communally is so powerful and so important. And the way that Zoom has allowed us, to be with 150 people all over the world doing this and feeling in that prayerful space together. Doing it individually is also super powerful. And the fact, like traditional prayer, I think it's infinitely elastic, that it can be elongated or shortened to the time and the moment that we have and that we need. But the other thing that we talk about in this work is taking it off the page and into your life. So how do we take the Jewish studio process as a whole? There's intention setting, art making, there's Beit Midrash, there's witness writing, and then there's the principles, some of which you named, like follow pleasure, right? That's a principle of the process. The no comment rule, that's a rule of the process. Notice everything, right? We have these studio rules. So there's both the pieces of the process and then the rules, the frameworks that hold it, that can all be done as a whole composite experience, similar to Tefillah, right? You can do the whole matbea, but you can also take pieces of that and bring them into your actual lived life outside of the process, right? That's what I mean by taking it off the page. So sort of going back to what we talked about at the beginning, how does Marabu come off the page and just like emerge from our lips in that moment of seeing the dolphins or whatever it is in our life? How does no comment be something that I'm applying to my relationship with my spouse, to how I'm parenting? This is an ongoing like struggle and thing I'm trying to remind myself of, things that I can develop in my practice with the process that then I want to apply in my actual lived life. What might it mean to follow pleasure in this really challenging conversation?
That's beautiful. I'm thinking also of creativity as tapping into the divine spark that is within us, of course. God being the ultimate creator, and kind of how you see the power in that connection.
100%. I say, right, like we are just saying, the page can hold it all. And I think God can hold it all. Like source, the creative source is another word that I use for God. And people can't hold it all.
Mhm.
And I think we're living in a time in which we're looking to one another to like hold all of our pain, our anguish, our suffering, or to mirror back to us exactly how we're feeling and how we're seeing the world. And if we don't get that back, it feels very alienating and very painful.
Mhm.
And each one of us are like struggling, heart pounding, struggling, seeking human beings that are also like grieving the world and trying to figure out what. So I think to maybe take some of that off of the individuals around us and to give some of that to God, some of that to creative process, the page, source really can hold it all of our deepest, darkest, scariest, angriest, most grief-filled thoughts and emotions. The process, God can hold that and can offer us a sense of being held by the universe. I think that's what I most feel in the creative process, and what I most want for everyone is that even if the person across the table from you in this conversation can't hold you, like source can hold you. You are held.
Mm.
You are part of a bigger tapestry, bigger than this moment, bigger than this one interaction, bigger than this community, but something much bigger is holding you. And I want for everyone to feel that. And I think this process, and certainly liturgical prayer, tefillah, are ways that we get to feel hopefully held by something bigger.
Beautiful. I use the language of "we are held" a lot, but I don't know if it's totally connected with me what that actually means. So thank you for that. I think that's really important language. And also, I think creativity in that moment where the pen is going or the brush is going, where it feels like I'm not the one that's moving it because I don't know what's coming next. I'm not thinking, I'm just doing. Um, that also feels divine to me, the kind of, and giving people the way to tap into that isn't professionalized, that isn't about product, is really powerful.
Yes, it's exactly that moment of like, I'm surprised by what's coming through. And I want that for Torah too, right? When we engage in Torah and these texts, like an interpretation you didn't know was there is coming through. You're acting as a vessel And I think of that so much. I've learned, I think, through musicians like you, of like, this song came
Mm.
through me, right?
Yeah.
You would say, not I wrote this song, like I had this idea and I put it down, but it came through. So how do we learn all of these practices as ways to open our vessel for source, which is both us and beyond us, to come through us and to bring what is most needed in the world right now? And that is how we can act both as both with integrity for ourselves, but also we can serve the broader community and the broader world.
If something that's been coming up for me over this conversation is Shabbat, and the
Mm,
idea of Shabbat as a time to take a break
mm,
from creating.
mm,
But then it got me to think, is it really a break from being creative if I haven't given myself the space to be in creativity for its own sake over the course of the week? I wonder if engaging in the process has changed or nuanced your relationship to Shabbat in any way.
mhm. That's such a good question. I think depending on what one's life looks like in non-Shabbat time and what kind of demands are placed on you, I think that Shabbat can actually be the perfect time where a kind of creativity that I think is in,
Mm,
for me, in alignment with Shabbat can come through, right? Where it's
yeah.
not for this sermon or this drosh that I need to write, or it's not for this, workshop that I'm facilitating later. It's just, lishma in a way, right? Like for its own sake, or we might
Hmm.
say for the name, for God, to let it come through without any sort of other things dictating what it is. And I think you can also do that. I mean, certainly with song, but even with art making, with ephemeral art, with arranging objects. Like I think there's ways to do that. That also for those who want to stay within the realm of halakha. But yeah, what does creating look like when we live into that moment of like the world is as it should be, right? If that's the invitation of Shabbat, what does creating look like from that place? Wow, how powerful.
This is inspiring me. I want to get like a Zen garden with the sand. I want to get my wiki sticks out. You know, those little
Oh
wax
yeah.
sticks. We used to give them out as like child gifts at Seder because you can create with them and they're connected there or they're not against any halacha. That's beautiful.
And
I'm
also just going outside your house. I mean,
please.
all those perfect things are beautiful.
Yes.
And like I'm
And
just I'm just looking outside my house right now of just like sticks, leaves,
mm,
weird, mangled seed pods, just like the beauty of, I guess, just opening ourselves to the idea that there is abundance to work with and to create with, and that can speak to us all around us at every time and every moment. And so we may need a beautiful, special, separate thing, but also there's materials all around us.
I love the language of materials, and I'm wondering if the idea um, that's come up in my mind over the course of our conversation as tefillah as a plane in which we are being creative with the material that is liturgy, and that prayer is the process of that and maybe the outcome of that. I'm wondering what you think we could learn from the process and more visual artistic medium, what we could bring from that into our tefillah.
I'm not sure this answers your question. I love the question. What it made me think of were
Yeah.
aspects of the Jewish studio process that I think probably are already in line with a lot of things folks think about in tefillah, but I think could really
Hmm.
benefit the tefillah space. Going back to something we talked about earlier, but how how do I lead in a way where it's like serving a real need of mine in this moment and trusting that that will serve others? I think so often we think like, what do I need to perform or do or put on for other people,
Yeah.
where I'm like separate from them. And one of the foundations of the Jewish studio process and in training folks to be facilitators in this process is that one is a participant facilitator, which may not mean you get to do every step as, elaborately as you might if you weren't also holding the space, but that part of what it means to be a facilitator is to be in the process yourself. And it almost seems so obvious to think about that for tefillah, but
Mm,
I think so often it's not the case,
yeah.
for all kinds of reasons, not to for all kinds of reasons. But how can I be leading in a way that is serving a real deep need in me so that I'm alive to this material? And if I'm alive to this, it will bring others alive and offer a place for them to find their own aliveness with it. So that's something that I was thinking about when you were talking.
That's beautiful. And the Jewish Studio Project has also offered tefillah. I know for the past many years you've done high holiday services and other such things. What does tefillah that is designed with the process in mind look like, feel like, sound like?
Hmm. Well, it changes over time.
Mhm.
Um, and I think staying in touch each year with like, is this meeting something that feels real and alive in us? And if it has to change, how do we message that need for change to our community? Because that's something I think prayer leaders, struggle with. It's like, well, everyone now loves these melodies, but actually I've moved on to these other things. I'm sure
Right.
this is something you think about. So how do I do that? And I will say we've had an amazing, however many years it's been, 7 years of leading these free ticketless, donation only, open to all services at the JCC, um, which have felt just collaborative and creative and alive and very much about grounded in the traditional tefillah, and then how to translate that into like, what does that mean for us today? So,
Mhm.
um, what does Avinu Malkeinu mean? So everything has kavanot with it, has like a framing, has like, okay, we're saying these words and we're like building the bridge to like, what might that mean for us today? And I will just share that last year and then again this year we'll be offering, we changed our Yom Kippur experience. For many years, it was very important to me that it was like very traditional.
Mhm.
And last year, it felt like something new was being called for or asked for. And we offered something called the Art of Forgiveness. And it was a
Mm.
Yom Kippur art making retreat that started with Kol Nidre and that went through Ne'ilah, but in the middle was doing the Jewish studio process of like, what does it
Wow.
look like to take really serious the idea of teshuvah, of repentance, of return, of renewal? I think it's really easy to say like, oh, I want to heal this relationship or forgive, but there's hard things in that, right? How can this art making process be a way of letting us go to those hard things and sort through what's there for us? What's blocking that? What is keeping us from repairing this relationship? And it was, I think we had 80 people for our first one. It was an incredible experience. It was also like strange to be
Wow.
doing art with people on Yom Kippur, and it was new for
Yeah.
all of us. But to do that and then to end with a communal Yizkor, the memorial service, and Ne'ilah, the concluding service, so it was sandwiched between the traditional liturgical elements,
Mm.
was super powerful. And I'll just share, I've never experienced a more powerful Yizkor service than that one,
Wow.
where people had done deep Beit Midrash, deep text learning, art making alongside one another, going deep into their process. And then we had this communal altar for Yizkor where people brought mementos and photos, and throughout the liturgical part of that service, people spoke about who they were remembering. And in a community that isn't a community and never meets other than in this setting, to feel that sense of connection that the process was able to create was really powerful. So I'm really curious about more experimentation about bringing together uh, liturgical modes, traditional prayer structure, and the process.
Yes. Me too.
I'm
Um,
excited. We should talk.
yeah, oh my god, of course we should, definitely. Um, if someone's listening and wants to bring, tapping into creativity as part of their spiritual practice, but is feeling maybe overwhelmed at the possibilities, is there maybe one little question or one little kind of place they might start?
Hmm. Well, just invite them to join Jewish Studio Project for anything that we're offering. We have
Yes.
public programs that are free and open to all. And yeah, I think it can be helpful when it feels overwhelming to be guided a
Mhm.
little bit and to have a community to do it with. Um, I can also just share that there's like asynchronous prompts on our website. So a way to take your own little journey that doesn't have
Mm.
to be a part of signing on to some bigger thing. So that can be helpful. But I think maybe just the prompt of like, notice what brings you most alive. What might it be like to try on the idea of that you're being held by something bigger and beyond you? Just even those ideas. What brings you pleasure?
Mm.
Um, and to just invite those into your life. And then I could just to say that anything can be a material to play and explore with. And sometimes using the most basic materials can open up something deep within us that feels less pressure. So sometimes I say, like, taking the back of an envelope or a receipt or like junk mail and something like a ballpoint pen or pencil and just beginning to play or experiment, even just giving yourself 2 minutes of letting marks go on the page without any sort of need for it to look like anything. Can be a nice entryway in, and to work with those kind of basic materials where, like, who cares what happens with it? can relieve some of the pressure.
That's beautiful. I'm definitely going to take some of these things for myself, and I'm so excited to learn more and delve more into your book that is coming out soon. Of course, we'll place the link for people to pre-order and learn more about it, that you're sharing your incredible wisdom with all of us. And as we like to close, I'm wondering if, before we go, can you leave us with a blessing?
Well, I'll say thank you so much for this incredible conversation. It's such a treat to get to be with you, and I feel so inspired by your work. So thank you so much for the generosity of questions and for having me. A blessing. May we each know that there is a deep and alive and generative and curious and sparkling like a gemstone place within us. No matter all of the worries of the world and the things that may cover that up and make us feel disconnected from that truth. And may we know that it actually takes much less than we might think to uncover and tap back into that place. And that the world is changed and transformed and brought alive when we are brought alive. And so to reconnect with that spark within us and to let it shine is in service not only of ourselves, but of each other and of the whole world.
Amen. Thank you so, so much for joining me today. This was an absolute delight, and I'm so excited to see what has sparked from this connection.
Me too. Thank you so, so, so much.
And thank you so much for listening. Our podcast is produced and edited by Rachel Kaplan. Jaffa Englander does our show notes. Our theme music is A New Light by me. You can find the show notes and even more goodness at lightlab.co. And you can follow us on socials at thelight.lab. We hope to be back in the Light Lab with you very soon. Shalom, everybody.